a very good morning, everyone. A very warm welcome to all of you today. I am Dr. Janita, the host and moderator for today's session. So the title of today's session is on Virtual Learning Masterclass. At the end of today's session, all of you will be learning the key insights on how to design virtual learning to effectively deliver and engage online learners. So let me introduce our speaker for today. He is Dr. Sanat Sukumaran, the managing partner of Agile Management Consultancy. He is an accomplished and sought after Agile trainer and coach spearheaded by his involvement with Atlassian Corporation, the world's largest Agile tooling company, in his capacity as Atlassian Communities leader for Malaysia. Dr. Sanat has the distinction of having presented at Asia's largest education technology conference and exhibition, better known as EduTech Asia, Singapore, over 3 consecutive years. Just to add on, Dr. Sanat Sukumaran used to be a lecturer in APU back in 1999 to 2008. So without further ado, let's welcome Dr. Sanat. Dr. Sanat, the floor is yours. Over to you, Doctor.
A very good morning, everyone. Before I go on, Janita, is the slide coming on well? And am I heard clearly?
Yes, Dr. Sanat, perfect.
Thank you. Thank you for the generous introduction, Dr. Janita. And it's a pleasure to be back. And it's nice to be here to share some best practices. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Virtual Learning Design Masterclass. Let me just start by saying I'm delighted to share some ideas, and this is a wonderful subject and that's close to my heart. Though it's given little attention, but it's gaining traction, I would say. And the idea is that we would want to succeed in improving the effectiveness of teaching and learning and the level of engagement that's crucial to ensure our learners succeed. So just to begin, let me just run through the outcomes that I just want to establish before we start. In outcome 1, I want to first examine characteristics of a modern learner. Right? We're trying to understand why the modern learner is so susceptible to information overload. And we will then look at outcome 2 as educators and trainers to understand ways and means to increase retention. And to increase retention, we should be cognizant of the idea of delivering concisely, taking into account learners' cognitive load to arrive at optimal attention. And the last outcome, to look at how these concepts, bringing all of them together, to design an effective virtual learning. Now, let me just start by just talking about the first outcome, to understand who's this modern learner? Well, I would say the modern learner is not really young or old. Well, there are several characteristics we look at. The first thing would be, as you would agree, right? They are always 24/7. Right? They have access to information. They're always on. And because of that, you also find that that's also us, right? It's not just the students, it's just also us. We're connected in big part to the social media, and the stats goes to show it. 100% of those born after 97 are actually on the social media. 90% of those born after 81, they are already on the social media. 80% between 65 to 80 are on social media, and a fairly big number, I would say, those born between 46 to 64 are on social media. So there are huge connectedness we see across generations. So again, on the subject of modern learner, this social media connectedness has allowed modern learners to be collaborative, so to speak, right? They're connected, they're more and more connected. And at the same time, there's this need for a lot of information, right? The hunger for information. And unfortunately or fortunately, that's sort of brought about a sort of level of impatience, the tendency of being impatient with so much, inundated with so much content, and it can be overwhelming at times. And the other key characteristic would be because of that, right? The burst of content, the burst of information, we see a reduction in attention span happening globally, to say the least. So I just want you to keep this in your mind as we discuss the idea of why we should be designing, keeping these thoughts in mind. So the first question I would say is, or rather the first poll I just thought of running up with all of you is to just ask this question. Am I, not just our students, am I a modern learner? So I'm just going to launch this on your screen. If you can just sort of insert your response. What do you think about it? Multiple options allowed. Okay, I see most of you have responded. Give the rest, say about 10 to 15 seconds more. All right, so let's just share the findings. It's interesting to note that all of you have picked one or more of these checklists, I would say, that qualifies us as a modern learner. And that's interesting because all of you have said that you like the flexibility of being able to access content anywhere, anytime. And a large portion of you, I would say 75%, agree that you would like to dictate, you want to be in control of what and how you like to learn. So that's really interesting. And also a large portion of you said that you like solving on the spot by accessing your smartphone. That's interesting. And if you were to do this sort of survey with your students, you'd be very surprised to find that the findings are not that much different, right? Because like I said earlier on, that the modern learner is not the learner with age, right? It's the generation we're talking about right now, the connectedness, the availability 24/7 and so on. So thank you for sharing. And that really sets the context of what I want to talk about in the next slide. And this is the idea of information overload. And you must agree with me that there's just so much information happening, right? We look, it's just bombarded. And as far as the stats are concerned, Google handles 5.6 billion searches per day, just a day. And even according to research, on average, we touch our smartphones 2,617 times. Now that includes the messages, right? You type on your words and whatever you reply. So all that counts in those counts. So that's a lot. That's a lot. And our poor brain is working so much, it uses 20% of the total calories, although the brain itself weighs only 2%. Not the head, the brain itself weighs 2% of the total body weight. So that's not surprising. The question is, are we victims of information overload? Now, before you answer yes and no or no in the chat, let me go through some checklists, right? The first thing is, right, do you switch tasks? Do you find that you're doing something and you inadvertently did something else almost instantaneously without even realizing you're checking your phone, but you're doing something, but you're checking your phone and then you're checking something else and doing something else. Some people call it multitask, but I won't use that word. Decision fatigue. Do you have this challenge sometimes because you just too much to grapple and you just can't make the right decision? Poor memory, poor mood, sometimes low energy level, but that's not entirely because of information overload though. But yes, it's a contributor. So now I'd just like you to go onto the chat, and if you can just say yes or no, or yes and no, whichever. So the question is, am I victims of information overload? And I give you some telltale signs that, inability to switch tasks sometimes, you're fatigued in making decisions, can't recall, can't concentrate. Okay, great. We have some who said yes and no. That's nice. Of course, let me just add on here by saying that information overload is more for some than in others, right? Because we handle it differently. And I guess you get what I mean, right? It's affecting us in one way or the other. So thank you everyone for sharing. So that's an important discussion, because I just want to set the premise that if we are ourselves having this challenge, what more our learners, right? So what is information overload? Let me put it this way. The input coming into our working memory, the mind, is more than what the mind can possibly handle, which means the input and processing is somewhat not equivalent. It never does, actually. Now, this causes a problem, and we call it a reduction in cognitive performance. Now, some people tell me it's okay, Sanat, I can manage information overload because I can multitask, right? You do hear that, right? Even my students used to tell me that in the past. Well, according to research, only 1 in 40 person can multitask, and that's only 2.5% of the population, and they are called super taskers. Now, I don't know about you, but I personally know for a fact that I am not capable of multitasking. So, ladies and gentlemen, information overload is a real thing. If we ourselves victims of information overload, then imagine our learners. How many times have we gone for presentation, we ourselves, shutting off, switching off? You're there, but not there. Surely our learners might be feeling the same way sometimes, if not most of the time. These are learners who are coming into our classes, our training, our sessions, already inundated with so much going on in their minds. And we don't want to make it any more difficult for them. So we have somewhat understood the idea of the premise that our learners are grappling with information overload. And it is therefore important for us to understand the need to deliver our training in such a way that we are able to increase retention. Learning cannot take place if our learners cannot retain. And that's in part because the way we've designed our content can't retain what we have taught them because of their reduced cognitive performance caused by information overload and not helped by the way we've designed our content. So let's keep it simple. I think I'm throwing a lot of jargons here. Now forget all of that. Well, the opposite of forgetfulness is retention, right? All I'm saying is that we do not have control over our learners' ability to learn in some parts. But we can use some strategies in our teaching and learning to increase retention, because retention is linked to learning, and increased retention in some parts correlates to increase in learning. Before I go on, I just want to check if everybody is okay with what's being shared so far. So all I'm saying is we want to talk about some techniques to talk about this idea of how we can boost retention in the hope of improving learning. Thank you, After. I've got the message on your chat. The key is we handle it differently. Absolutely. Thank you for that. So I'm just going to, yeah, by the way, please feel free to, put anything on the chat so that we can take on questions as we go along. So I suppose everybody is okay. And we can now proceed to those techniques that we're talking about. So I'm just going to share some strategies to increase information retention. Some of these things are not new to you, but perhaps not put together in that way. So I'm just going to share some thoughts. The first strategy we talk about is value. And when I say value, always see things from the learner's perspectives. And that's becoming more important now than ever before, now that we are on the virtual space. Just imagine for a while, if I'm the learner, there's always this question, right? Why must I learn this? For what? What's so important? And I know the feeling of educators and trainers that we always feel that we need to give them enough, else we're not doing justice. It happens all the time. As if when we cut down our content, it's like we're cutting down our limbs and our arms. So we just feel not so good. But the question is, one of the best ways to connect and to make it valuable is to demonstrate your passion and interest in the subject. And how do you do that? Right? By just showing your emotions. That's not a sign of weakness. Demonstrate your energy. Humor, that would do it. Discuss your personal experiences and experiences of others you know. Give useful examples and connect the dots. And if you can't do any of these things, and if that's so much time for you, if you're running after class, one after class, and so on, then just insert some pictures that sends the message across. That does a lot of help. And the other thing is that I talk about aligning stated and unstated goals. You'd be very surprised. Your learners are not just there listening to you about the subject matter, which is the stated goals, but they're also watching you, right? The unstated goal. You're seeing the unseen. And let me give you an example. Every time when I go for training, and the feedback I get more is the way I've engaged them, the way I was patient and sticking to the questions with them. I'm sure you've had such experiences before. The learners are looking beyond just the way you teach, right? And your feedback is in large part not only the content or the subject matter knowledge that you're imparting, but the scaffolding of it, right? The unstated goals, the energy, the laughter, and so on. So, well, what does research tell us? It tells us that 88% of available content are remembered after 1 month and 89% forgotten in the same duration. So let me qualify by saying this, that valuable content from the perspective of learners, right? And that's not easy to do, but it's important, right? And that's why they're coming to us. Yes, there's so much content out in the open and they have access to them all, but the value we bring is the ability for us to make it palatable to them, right? They see the connection, they see the dots better than if they just went online and read something on their own. So that's the value we're talking about. That's so very important. Of course, there's so much in here, but I'm just summarizing them in the interest of time. And the other aspect that is important is the aspect of reinforcement, reinforce, right? And why I'm saying this, because information overload and learners reduce cognitive performance could be avoided if we reinforce. And the way to do it is so simple, right? There's nothing really very difficult. All you could say is that what you've just said and what are you going to do now and what are you going to do next. Just keep saying that. What you've done, what are you going to do, what are you going to do next. And of course, some parts, it's extremely helpful if you can repeat them, reiterate them. That's reinforced. And perhaps even do a simple survey like what I just did now, the poll, right? You just get it out, let them, just quickly say something, do something, just a quick one. That is also reinforcement. And what does research say about that? 59% of valuable information is forgotten in a week without reinforcement. 95 to 98% remembered with reinforcement. So that goes a long way to tell you the importance of this idea of reinforcement. So what we just did, we talked about value and explained to you some strategies on how to apply value in your strategy to increase retention. We just looked at reinforcement, and I'm going to look at retrieval, right? Now, learners should rehearse remembering, right? And that helps, and that will help if you've had the value and reinforcement done earlier on. And you can do it quite easily, I would say. Like, for example, explain 3 different strategies to increase information retention. Just talked about 3, get them to reinforce it, to retrieve it. Or the difference between retrieval is it's slightly longer in its application, whereas reinforce is a quick one. We call it a quick nugget, whereas a retrieval takes a little bit longer. For example, you could get them to watch a video of someone presenting and tell them which of these strategies were employed by the presenter that we just talked about, the value reinforced retrieval. So they start to connect, apply, and remember what has been said. Again, when it comes to research, what does that say? Learners who took more practical tests of retrieval forgot lesser than those who did lesser practice tests. And this only goes to show more retrieval methods and the variety of retrieval methods. That's also important. And I'll talk to you why we need to vary the retrieval methods, not just the same method. The more retention, and the more retention means increased learning takes place. So that's what we're talking about, right? We're talking about the idea of trying to increase learning by being cognizant of the idea of information overload, and learners already reduced cognitive performance because of their being inundated with various technology tools and other distractions. And embracing this as a fact, whether we like it or not, they are going to do it, and craft and scaffold our design in a way that achieves that, to increase retention. So that's the whole idea, right? We're putting all together here. And when I say value, we talked about doing things from the learner's perspective. We talk about the emotions when it comes to the value, your personal experience, the experiences of others, the humor you bring, or it could even be the pictures or little cartoons or whatever you put forward. Stated and unstated goals would be your subject matter knowledge, obviously, and the way in which you approach them, right? The human touch you bring, and the connectedness you bring, and the empathy you bring to the learning, because they see that, right? The unstated goals. And reinforce, we talked about repetition, right? Saying what you've done, what you're going to do, what you're going to do next, and meaningful tasks, as in small little exercises that could be a poll. It could be just as simple as pausing and asking them a question and they writing it down on the chat. So it's not really that difficult, because I don't want you to think that I'm trying to say that you need to start, revamping your content. No, it's just about that pauses, right? That little stops, that gate checks that you have every now and then that can allow the reinforcement to take place. And the retrieval would be the reflection. I just talked to you some examples. You can get them to watch a video, an exercise, a case study, a small test, a little quiz that sort of encapsulates what has been taught. And well, I'm going to do just that because I'm talking about all this. So it wouldn't be fair if I didn't do that in my session. So I'm just sort of going to flash a little quiz for you right now. And it's just to recap what we just discussed. Okay, let's just give everybody another 30 seconds or so. Okay, so I think most of you have answered. The last one seems a little tricky, right? Haha. Okay. Just 10 more seconds and then we can share. So what I'm doing now is basically a combination of reinforce and retrieval. It's more for retrieval really because it's a quick one. Sorry, more for reinforce because it's a quick one. Retrieval takes a bit more time. So let me share the results and what we've got. So the first one, yes, reinforce is a simple task. It's a quick one. It takes a relatively shorter period. Number two, yes, most of you got that right. You reinforce before you do retrieval because you can't retrieve if you've not reinforced, right? They've not got it. It's important to reinforce before you retrieve. And number three, showing empathy to learners, it's a form of giving value, right? So that's the value you bring. So that's the first answer. And for the last one, most of you got that right. Reinforce is where you have an application of concept, because um, which is true. Reinforce is best used for application of concept. Well, that's supposed to be retrieval, right? So the answer is true. Retrieval is best used for quick understanding of concepts. So let's get it quite clear here. So remember, we have value, we have reinforce, we have retrieval, right? So before you can do the retrieval, which is at the end, you will have some little short pauses of quick questions. So the short questions, short pauses to check whether it's understood, that is your reinforcement. And the retrieval comes in when they apply certain concepts in a larger context, usually with more time. And therefore, the kind of questions you have for retrieval would be more application based. And you will be able to then gauge whether they've understood what you want them to understand, right? Because with application, you will know whether they've got it or otherwise. So very good. So I think we've got that ideas across. And I'm just looking at questions on the chat. So I think everybody's okay. No questions coming in yet. So let's look into another aspect, which is equally important, which is the idea of delivering concisely. Keeping the content to just minimum. We want to now look at how we deliver content. And I personally think it's a challenge. And as trainers and teachers and educators, we find it hard to cut down. And I used to think that a lot of times, and when it all happened because when I did training, because I do the professional training and I do the application type training, and my stakeholders have come and told me that, are we doing a bit too much? And it's hard for you to then tell them that, no, you have to learn that. But then when I look down deeply enough, that do they really need that information? Can that be done not just during the session? Can we have it before and after? So that's the point, right? Can we now structure our lesson to have that before, after? Well, that's important, because if I'm going to cramp everything down in that 1 hour, 1.5 hours, then surely I'm inundating them too much. It's just information overload. It's just too much that I'm trying to get them to learn. And if I'm a student, right, I'm always sifting in my mind, right? Is this important? Is this important? So if I'm going to tell them everything is important, then there's no meaning to what is important also, right? Because everything is important. So keep that in mind when you structure your lesson, because we want to really just have the sort of content that you think delivers engagement, not the ones that they can read on their own, because that doesn't warrant them to come and listen to you anyway. They can read it on their own. Yeah, I know it's a bit of culture, because some students are not used to that. They expect you to, put that all in the open for them. They do that. And I know lecturers have told that. And if that is the case, then you can pick and choose the kind of content that you want to cover more and skip the ones that they can read. So there's a workaround for that too. Right. So this is another concept that I want to share very quickly, is the idea of cognitive load theory. And this was popularized by this gentleman, Professor Sweller from Sydney. And he talked about basically our working memory has a limited capacity of holding 5 plus minus 2 items. And that ranges from 3 to 7 at any given time. And apparently, according to him, anything more would be considered an overload. Now, here's the problem, right? Learners today, whether young or adults, are increasingly distracted. Distracted from handphones, social media, other intrinsic, extrinsic distractions that's happening around their lives. And which means their load is already high to begin with. They're already inundated with these things. So as a trainer and teacher, I should accept the fact right? Let's accept the fact that they are going to be distracted. They are coming with relatively high load, high cognitive load than they've ever been in the past, especially right now. So what does it mean for me? Now, should I go with the upper limit, 7 at any one stretch? I would personally go for the lower limit. Let's keep 3 content at any given stretch, which means you put together about 3 concepts in a stretch before a logical break. I'm not saying you only have three content in your entire slide of 1 hour. I'm just saying in a stretch, you probably do 3 content and then have a break, a logical break. It doesn't have to be a physical break. Logical break could be a logical pause, could be a question you ask them. It could be just not even speaking. That silence is deafening, right? Just stop. Just allow them to assimilate the ideas. It's so powerful. That's in fact one of the best logical breaks you can have. Just allowing them to connect the dots, to sink in. So how do you put this together, right? And I've got a little sort of formula for you. About 3 topics in a 15-minute stretch, then switch. Now, of course, there's no hard and fast rule. You can even do a 20-minute stretch and then switch. What does switch mean? Switch means a logical break, right? That means you can either pause, have a question or something, that sort. So you can now, if you look at this idea, if you start to get this idea, right, you're breaking up your lesson now. If you see your 1 hour lesson, so it's now being broken up into 4 parts. And does that really mean you have to restructure your slides? In most parts, no. In some cases, yes. Why? Because you may want to inject certain quizzes that you want to have in between those logical breaks. That yes, you can add on that. But your content, does it have to change? It depends, because if you're inundating them with too much, then you're not delivering concisely either, right? So you want to relook at the content. But in most parts, it should not be overwhelming work for you. And of course, there's much to this, but I'm not going into the details given the time constraint we have. Now, the idea that we're talking about is that 15 minutes and every topic you introduce have that reinforcement activity. Remember that little question you have, little quiz you have, you do that. It could be just a minute. Topic 1, topic 2, topic 3. Well, I mean, the numbers are all not cast on stone, right? I mean, if you're going to ask me, Sanat, do we have to stop every 4 minutes? Can it be 5 minutes? Of course you can, but you get the idea, right? You have that reinforcement every end of a topic. And at the end of the 15 minutes, then obviously you have a little retrieval activity, because that switch could be an application question. It could be asking them something to do, and so on. But the question you may ask me, right? What are the examples of reinforcement activities? There's so many things you can do. And a lot of them needs almost no effort on your part. Number 1, just reply in the chat. Are they okay or not with this concept? Right? And then share a joke if you have them. Otherwise, ask them if they have questions. If you allow them to unmute. Thumbs up, thumbs down, whatever. Right? Call out someone randomly if that's possible. Launch a quick poll or quiz like what I did. And even silence, just that deafening silence will help, right? So those are the little reinforcement activities you can do as you progress through your topics within that 15 minutes chunk. So with that, I'm just going to pause to allow you to reflect on what I've just said. Feel free to post in the chat if you have any questions on this. Well, these are not an exhaustive list, by the way. There are a lot more things you can do to reinforce. I'm sure you have had your own experiences. Feel free to share in the chat so that we can together discuss them here. Okay, so I'm just taking that to be a sign that we can progress. And that is our next little reinforcement activity. Okay, you have this now on your screen, I believe. For question 2, the same one answer option is actually missing. It was supposed to be 20 minutes long for the third option, by the way. So you don't have a 20 minutes answer option for question 2. So that's my bad. You could do 15 minutes too. That's possible. Okay, let's take another 20 seconds. Okay, I think most of you have answered. Okay, I got your point. Mr. Prof. Murali, you mentioned about why don't you listen to me? Husband says he didn't reinforce before going to the next point. Thank you for sharing that. Thanks, Prof, for that. All right, so I'm just gonna share what everybody has said. I think the first one is quite obvious. Keeping your content to bare minimum is the second answer. Second one, I think there's no answer option there, but you can either have it in 20 minutes interval or 15 minutes interval, that's fine. Third one, yes, most of you got that right. You've got to reinforce before going to the next topic. And so that's how you incrementally build on what has been said, right? Because the reinforce allows that incremental building of knowledge. Because remember, when you're talking about something new, you are basically talking at the level of them gaining familiarity first. You can't quite apply if they don't know the subject matter. So the retrieval allows you to apply and do some higher order level thinking activities, as opposed to the reinforce, which is usually the lower order of it, because you want to gain familiarity. Pretty much like what I'm doing right now. Okay, so now comes the sort of the heart of the session. I mean, I'm just trying to put things all together because when you talk about designing, you've got to craft these concepts that I've talked to you about in the last couple of minutes. And let's see how a typical session would be. Now, if I were to craft a session, let's say I've got a number of topics I want to cover, I'll do a 15-minute session where I teach primarily. And the retrieval could be a breakout room. Say I craft a question and I put them on Miro, or have some exercise they got to present on PowerPoint. I have a breakout room. And remember, your breakout room outcome is very important. Don't just leave them like that. See that there's an outcome of that breakout room. And then you have topic 4 and 7 where you teach. And then you've got the retrieval coming in where you have a case study. that they can start to apply those concepts and teach again, and then you have retrieval, right? Maybe in this case, it could be a demo that they want to show you. So, well, this is ideal, obviously, but the point that I want to impress upon you is that in your 90 minutes, right, and this is a 90 minutes lesson plan, you can mix and match your activity type. Don't just go all the way teaching, especially on the virtual space. It's quite disastrous. In fact, if you ask me the question, can we even do this in our face-to-face class? You obviously can. You obviously can. I get that a lot during my sessions. You can do that even in your face-to-face class. Obviously, you don't call it a breakout room, but you can have that little groupings, right? So if you want to see how I've applied this for this particular session, right? So you notice this concept 315S, right? Every session is 3 topics. I do more or less. Sometimes you have 2. Like I said, it's not cast on stone. You can actually have 2 topics in 15 minutes, but you get what I mean. You have that small chunks, right? 15-minute chunks, and you switch. So switch here means you do something else, not teach anymore. You do a breakout room. Then you teach and you switch, case study. You teach, switch, demo. So you're getting sustained engagement levels, right? And you're not cognitively overburdening them in the process. And so if you look at this particular session, right, what I'm doing right now, before I get to that, what if you're doing a stretch? Like I do professional training because I do the certification programs and so on. So I have classes over 3 days, 9 to 6, 9 to 6, 9 to 6. So if you're doing that, then make sure you have 10 minutes break every hour. This is if you have a 3-day back-to-back session on Zoom or Teams, whatever. And it's important because you want to prevent this whole fatigue. They call it Zoom fatigue, right? Sometimes other fatigue. And let me just apply this in the context of this session, like what I've been doing with you right now. It's approximately a 1-hour session. We started about 10:10. So by 11:10, we should be over in about 10 minutes time. So we are about there. So in terms of how I structured this session, right? We had the welcome, and then I said a few things, and then I had a poll with you. That little poll was that 1-minute thing. And then after the idea of information retention, I had another poll, or I had a question. Some of you asked that on the chat. So I'm doing this, a little bit of retrieval. We have some advanced questions in the poll. So this is exactly how I structured this session today. So you see what I mean, right? Obviously, we've got the Q&A coming up after, and that will sort of encapsulate all the things that we're talking about. So it's important for you to, when I say design, I'm not saying you should now have an Excel file where you plan everything to the dot. I'm not saying that, but it will become natural to you when you start doing it over time, that you will have to have that intermittent pauses, the reinforcement activities, you have the retrieval activities, and then you vary your activities and people don't get bored. Of course, in an actual session, I would have done other things like Miro and Kahoot and whatever tools I have. But you see, the idea is the tools are secondary. I'm not a firm proponent of using tools, but you use the tool in the right way, right? And that helps them. That helps the learners. Tools are important, but they have to be in context of what you're doing. So just to wrap up the session, I'm almost at the end of my presentation today. Well, remember, it's a journey, right? What I've shared with you was just some ideas, but you are the best person to decide what you need. So I typically ask 3 questions. This is very agile way of doing things if you know how it works, right? The first question, what should I stop? Second, what should I start doing? If it works, continue. Or if it's something new that you've not done and you've listened from the presentation today, you can do something new and continue if it works. And make it a practice to get feedback from your learners as you go along, every training, or if you can, every few sessions you've had with your students, they can tell you loads of stuff. And you'd be surprised the ideas that they can share with you, how to improve, and you can only get better. So in short, I just want to encapsulate what we've discussed today. We started the session by examining characteristics of a modern learner. They're always on, therefore connected and collaborative, information hungry. And because they're information hungry, they're often impatient and overwhelmed, resulting in short attention span in most cases. And then we talked about information overload, where modern learners are inundated with so much content. And then we discussed the strategy to increase retention, and we talked about the three strategies of value, reinforce, and retrieval. And we also looked at the importance to keep our lesson compact and essential, concisely, and not try and load them too much in one PPT, have the before, during, after. And we also looked at the idea of cognitive overload. If you remember Professor Sweller, this theory and so on. And we said that while 7 was what was said as the amount of things they can grapple at any one time, I personally feel that in my sessions, I go with the lower limit. I have a stretch of 3 different topics before I have a logical break. So you remember the formula 3-15S, right? So that's the sort of formula I use. 20 minutes is fine. You can even have 3-20S. That's also fine. But try not to exceed that. And we also looked at optimal retention. And that's important because we want to use these concepts in all our lessons, structuring them in small parts. And together, we are able to then design our sessions to effectively engage and interact with our learners and achieve learning. So with that, I have come to my end of my session. And I want to just part with one thing before we have the Q&A. These are just best practices, right? These are best practices driven by some very good grounded research work. By the way, some of these findings you see from the slides are from this institute. They call it the Work Learning Research Institute, and they come up with this document. But they're not cast on stone, so only you know what's best for you to incorporate them in your own lesson plans. And that's something that you have to have good control of, because you know the context, you know your learners, you know the background, and you make the best call. So these are ideas that you can use, and I found them to be very useful for me, and even the ones I've shared in the past. So with that, I would like to thank all of you, everyone, for your time today. I hope you have taken back something valuable to help you at your very own journey to design effective virtual learning. On that note, I will hand over the session to Dr. Janita. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sanat. I think the sharing session is so informative. We all can relate, we're all educators here. And also saying that we have been applying some of the techniques as well, but thank you again. But to the rest, if you have any questions, please do post it on the meeting chat, or you may choose to unmute yourself and ask the question if you have. Anyone, please?
Hello, hi Janita.
Hi, Nadia.
Okay,
Hello.
let me just turn on the video as well. Hi. Okay, in terms of the, okay, right now moving from, because we have done this virtual learning for nearly 2 years, I think, yeah. So
Nice.
In terms of the content, do you think we should, even into the future of education, so do you think that eventually our materials will just have to be bite-sized eventually, instead of large volumes?
Absolutely.
So what's your take on that? Yeah.
That's you know, that's the direction. If you notice, even in major platforms like Coursera and the Khan Academy and all the rest, it's always going to be bite-sized. And you look at the way they structure the content, it's always bite-sized. I think it's very helpful because, you know, when you talk about, you know, microcredits and credentials like that, people can actually use that little content even in other contexts, and you make it very reusable, and you make it so palatable. And even from the from the professional body standpoint, if you have a way in which you can measure someone's outcome against that little bite-sized content, which ties up with the learning outcome, so that measurement, the matrices can also come in to help you talk to your stakeholders how people have fared with regards to that way of answering questions. So absolutely, I think that's the way forward.
Yeah, thanks very much for the insight.
Yeah, and I also think that yes, if you're going to do it first time, it's going to take a little bit of effort, but thereafter, when you keep doing it, it's easier. Like, for example, this session, I've run it a few times, with different, organizations. So it's easier for me now because I have structured my lesson, even this 1 hour presentation, that particular way. So it's like, autopilot, it's easy. But of course, the first time, it took me a while. But now when I do slides and presentations, it's so ingrained in me that I always think in terms of bit sizes, small chunks. It's so normal. It was not earlier, but now it is. So I think like anything new, it takes time, right? So yeah, so allow that evolution to slowly take place.
It takes getting used to, don't you think? It's a constant evolution. I would totally agree with you, because it's first it's just translating that class to just the 2 hour class into online, and then after that, how do then I actually feel the fatigue on the students' part as well. So the breaks that you recommend are excellent, actually, the breaks and the quizzes. So we'll try to do more of that in future.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And nice to see you again.
Yes, of course. Good to see you.
and by the way, on that note, Nadia, it's sometimes it's just about just stop. Just don't say anything. And it's so good for you too, because you're catching your breath.
Yes.
You've been speaking so much. Just stop, allow them to assimilate, and you're taking your breath. You're calmer now, and then you say something.
Yep.
That gap of 30 seconds, I'm telling you, it's so powerful. It's so powerful.
Yeah. So it's the mindful moment.
Absolutely, you got that right word. The mindful moment.
All right. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Any more questions?
Nadia is our digital learning architect. Thank you.
Yeah. We have also a couple of other digital learning architects as well. Yes,
there
go
are
ahead,
many.
Mr. Raj.
Right.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi, Sanat. This is Raj here. I'm one of the lecturers as well. And I think I like the part when I believe someone asked this question, doing it in bits, chunks, and so on. I think I also agree that it can also be done in a face-to-face. Whenever we get back to our good old face-to-face meeting, because for one, I am somebody who like to throw my voice, and when I'm passionate about the subject, it can get a bit stressful. After some time, you get tired being in front of the class. So I think this is a very good way how we can break it into chunks with the formula you have given.
Yeah.
I think the same thing can be applied as well in a face-to-face. It's just my comment, which I think we can apply as well. Thanks.
Raj, we all have this experience, right? I know when you come out of the class, we're so tired because we're saying so many things, and you want them to get it. And we feel as if that, it's not, we're not done justice. And that really defeats the whole idea of flipped classroom, right? We want them to do the work. But we think that when we say and talk and discuss a lot, they're going to get it. Yes, people do get it. Don't get me wrong. There are people who like to learn and listen. But the whole idea is to switch that now around and allow them to do some work.
Yeah, that's right. Thank you for your comment.
Sure.
Do we have any more questions, comments, suggestions, please, from the audience?
Not a quick question, if I may.
Sure.
Firstly, thank you for the presentation. Very clear, structured, and informative. Yeah, so a lot of things to actually apply. Slightly off tangent, but probably to tap into your experience and expertise. One of the things that I often get, even a constant debate at home with my two boys, is use of video in this sort of learning environment, right? Because most of the younger gen, they tend to shy away from turning the cameras on. So what's your strategy for that? Do you think it's okay or it's no big deal? The content is more important than the container in which it's delivered. No problem if you're talking to the wall, you're not sure, but they're responding still to quizzes and stuff. What's your take on that? Any strategies that you use personally to sort of get them to sort of be a bit more interactive?
I like to take the middle path. So what I've done is this, Prof. You know, when you, despite saying it, they will still not switch on. That's for a fact. And what I tell them is fine if you're not switching on during my session, because anyway, I'm on my full screen anyway, PowerPoints, I can't see them. But what I insist that during the breakouts, when they have sessions in a group, they have to have their cameras on. Because that's when they discuss it, the body language, the information gets disseminated. So that is sort of a agreement that I had with my sessions. So they're okay with that.
Okay, thanks for that. Useful tip. I just see how my children go to school these days. The elder fella is on the bed with the laptop, with the blanket, yeah.
Oh no. Okay, so, he has set his context, all right.
Yeah. Thanks, Anand.
Sure, absolutely. Most welcome.
So I think I've met you somewhere. I can't recall where, but
yeah, in a couple of sessions.
Okay, right.
All right, before we wrap up the session, any more questions, any more feedback or suggestions from anyone, from the audience?
Yeah, I see Nadia's point about talking to the wall. You know, that's really what it is, right? I mean, sometimes, you know, I've heard of people talking about these things. You know, they say, you know, that camera, that dot, they say you should fall in love with that dot. People talk about that, you know, because that's where you engage with that dot.
Yeah, true. Can relate to that actually, Dr. Sanat. All right, so without delaying the rest of the time for everyone for today, so let's wrap up the session. Thank you again, Dr. Sanat. And thanks everyone for joining this interesting virtual learning design. And also I'd like to wish all of you stay safe, take care, and have a good weekend, everyone. Thank you again.
Thank you. And just one more thing. Sorry, guys. If I can just say, can we just have a group photo? Because we thought of having this as a, if you don't mind turning on the camera, that'll be a challenge, I know, for some of you. But if you can, that'd be nice. So we can take a quick one.
Oh, yes, I forgot about that. But thank you, Dr. Sanat.
Yeah, it is like
my students give the excuse,
in my sessions, I do it all the time.
I look like a bear, so I don't want to turn on the camera.
Nadia, I can relate, Nadia.
Sorry?
I can relate to
yeah,
you.
they will say, I just woke up, miss. I look like a bear. Okay. I don't want to know, actually.
Oh, no,
so
Nadia.
Don't turn on the camera.
No, Nadia, maybe for your next session, in this class, you can tell them, next session, we are going to take photographs. So I want all cameras, you know.
Yeah. So do your touch-ups and everything before class.
All right. So we're going to take on let's take a photo with a count of 3. Yeah. 1, 2, and 3. All right. Got it. Thank you so much, everyone. And have a nice
Thank you, Dr. Sir.
Nice weekend.
Have a wonderful day, everybody.
Thanks. Bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Dr. Sanat. Nice having you. You have a good day and stay safe.
Thank you. You too.
I'll see you again. Bye-bye.
See you. Take care. Bye.
Hi, Dr. Kenneth. Are you still there?
Yes, I am, Sanat. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, hi. That is a very interesting session. Sorry, I didn't take part earlier in the
No
talk.
worries.
Yeah, I had some nice, useful tips to do. So just sharing session. So just the thing is, when you are teaching technical subjects, so the students are also very eager to learn as many concepts as possible. So
Mm,
and otherwise they feel that they are not they haven't learned sufficient.
mhm.
It's not that going into the detail or the depth of each one, but the concepts itself. The
Yeah.
volume to cover is quite a lot. Without, of course, I understand your idea about keeping it precise and so on. So the
Mm,
volume is quite a bit to cover. So in the process, to give these quizzes and all that,
mm,
the activity is time consuming, and that's one of the
absolutely.
challenges we
So
face.
one way to look at that, do I address you as Raji? Or
Yeah, you can call me. I'm Rajeshwari Mandava. Yeah.
okay, okay, Raji. Sorry. So one of the way to look at that is that you remember I talked about before, during, after. But you see, this is the challenge, practical challenges, because if you do it like that, some students will come back and give you some feedback and say, this lecturer is not covering everything. She's
Yes.
saying we study ourselves something before, during she'll cover something less, after we have to do some more. So why is she there for? You will get this sort of questions. So what I always tell that is, sometimes this has to be a policy or teaching learning sort of policy or framework, top down also, because if more and more lecturers start to do this, it becomes part of the culture in that organization. That's the way to do. I mean, seriously, if you're going to rush and do so much in that 1 hour, 1.5 hours, there's only so much you can do.
Yes.
And you're not going to the depth so much because you are covering the breadth so much, right?
Yep.
And the discussion, that's where learning takes place, right? The engagement is not there. Because how can you engage, as you rightly said? Because there's so much to cover. This content is so vast.
Mm.
And so absolutely I agree with you, because when you have the breadth to cover, you can't engage. Absolutely no way. And that's why I stress on the idea of delivering concisely. And
Mm.
that's very important. So in my sessions, by the way, I didn't share this. I do 3-day sessions on how this is done practically. We
Mm.
discuss some techniques and all that. But this has to be orchestrated top down, I would say. More and more staff just do it, and it becomes the norm, the new norm. The problem is
Mm.
our students are so fat with information, they feel the content in the slide, it's all they need to know. And that's what they need to master, remember, regurgitate in the exam. That's it.
That's it. Now we don't have exams like that anymore. So,
Yeah.
but one thing that I find very useful is, instead of me, sometimes even the lab work, because the lab works is more challenging.
Hmm.
So we have to do demonstration. We can, so we ask them to now engaging them in the lab sessions is much
Yeah,
more useful to
that's right.
sharing their desktop and asking them to run the experiment or
That's
giving
right.
them that kind of
That's right.
exercise. That
In
is,
fact, you brought up something very interesting, because my presentation today was mainly for the presentation, the slide theory is proper, the lecture proper. But there are actually different engagement techniques that you're going to use, if it's tutorial or lab.
mm,
So those were not within the coverage. So you're absolutely right. There are different techniques that we can use for
mm,
different sessions.
yes, yes. Yes, so we've been doing it online for now last more than a year. We've come quite far, but
Yeah,
making them do, even though if it is the same, like running a coding experiment, if they run it, I feel that they learn better, that they
yeah,
are more engaged in doing things.
absolutely,
So
absolutely. So
lately, it's been very rewarding that there is.
absolutely. So one thing that I always suggest to when
Mm,
it comes to this kind of sessions, the practical sessions and all that, and
mm,
I've run all these sessions, very technical sessions online also. And how I do it is this: you just need to have very, very clear step-by-step instructions for one exercise.
Yeah.
So clear that it's no-brainer that they can do it and they will surely get it. You just need that one success story, one stretch of everyone being able to do it. And thereafter, you find that their level of motivation increases. Then you can test them at higher order level of thinking.
Yeah. Yeah, interesting. I mean, and sharing of ideas of how each one runs their sessions and what has proved successful. I mean, theoretically, those educators, they have some theories which guide the teaching and learning process, but we are the practical
Yes, that's
aspects
right.
with what is
That's
working
why
for
when I presented to you, I'm sharing with you, these are the ground issues we have. Yes, the theory says this. We'll take the theory because it is research based. I mean, there's some basis to that. But we try to marry it with what we're doing in the context that we're doing it.
Yeah. So we have many challenges, the expectations of the students, and do we have to match all of them and come up with a formula that is best suited.
I often work with the teaching and learning department because I tell them that you're going to get lecturers sporadically doing what they're doing. They're going to be complaints and you can't handle it. But if you have a sort of a policy, we're talking about deliver concisely, and everybody knows, the students are aware of this is a style that we're going to adopt from now on and why we're doing it. It's a bit like change management. When you introduce something new, you need to have the awareness going out, and that's important. Else, what happens is that lecturer becomes susceptible to all sort of negative feedback, and it can get a bit ugly.
Yeah, nice meeting you. Sorry, I didn't on my phone. I mean, my camera. I'm at home very much. It's a non-working day for me.
Sure, no worries. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing. All right, take care.